everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. Where did my friend go? Before I introduce John from Therapy Gardens, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank Nancy Andre. Nancy is here from 1 Wingate East in Needham, and she donated the refreshments today, and she'll stick around if anyone has any questions about her new property. So now I will introduce John. Thank you. He's here for coffee talk. Thank you for bringing the coffee.
Certainly.
Yum.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone. Let me know. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. So we're going to talk about coffee today. But before we talk about coffee, for the few of you who haven't heard about who we are, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Therapy Gardens and Senior U first. We were started, and forgive me those of you who have heard this tale more than once, we were started 3 years ago by a gentleman who was a former high school principal, and his original idea was to engage seniors in Massachusetts with hands-on gardening. So we were originally bringing dirt and elevated garden beds around to senior centers and trying to encourage people to get into gardening. And what we found was that the hardcore gardeners didn't need us. They were doing it anyway. And other folks seemed to like hearing about and talking about gardening more than doing the gardening. So our workshop format really took off, and now this workshop format is all that we do. We've got a bunch of presenters, and we're in, I think, 95 cities and towns now. We travel all around Massachusetts giving these presentations. And since the subject matter has really departed from gardening, originally it was all about gardening, but now we're obviously doing things beyond that, including the subject today. We've created Senior U, which is another umbrella that will speak to the fact that a lot of this stuff's not about gardening. And if you go to our website, you go to therapygardens.com or seniorU.com. We encourage you to do that and to sign up for our newsletter. We put a fair amount of time and effort into the newsletter. We'd love if you signed up for it. And our promise to you is, unlike so many other businesses, we won't do anything with your email address. A couple of years ago, I guess it was 18 months ago, I went to a dry cleaner for the first time in probably 6 years because I had an event suddenly that I needed a pressed suit for. And when I went in there, the gentleman asked me for my phone number. And I said, no, I'm not going to give you my phone number, and I'm not going to give you my email address. And then he asked for a phone number, and reflexively and stupidly, I gave him my phone number. And I was literally maybe 3 miles from the dry cleaner when my phone started to ping with messages. So we share those stories because we really don't like that. So again, if you go and sign up for our newsletter, our promise to you is we won't do anything with your email address. And some of the subject matter that we're doing now on Senior U, you might see other stuff that interests you that you might want to mention to the director. Artificial intelligence is a really popular subject right now. We've got some excellent presenters on that subject, and there are all sorts of other subjects on there that might interest you. So before we move on, any questions about us? Okay, great. So coffee. And this is a quote from Abraham Lincoln: if this is coffee, please bring me some tea. But if this is tea, please bring me some coffee. So that's a reminder to me of how lucky we are to have really good quality tea and coffee generally available for our consumption. When I was a kid growing up, the choices weren't nearly as diverse as they are now. Now you can get a lot of different stuff. And before we start and get into it, I wanted to mention my grandmother. My grandmother drank more coffee than anybody we knew. My sister, brother, and I swore that all she put into her body was coffee and Chesterfield filterless cigarettes. And she did suffer from macular degeneration, and if I could go back in time, I would have encouraged her to eat a Brussels sprout. But other than that, she lived the longest of my four grandparents. She lived well into her 80s despite her nutrition being extremely poor. And it's just a correlation, but coffee, I assume, had to be a big part of that. She drank it day and night, and she would send my grandfather off on journeys to get coffee soda. They found a place that sold coffee soda that was 40 miles away from where they lived, and my grandfather would have to go regularly and get coffee soda, which she would drink if she wasn't drinking the coffee. Does anybody else have a coffee story about how much coffee they drink? And I'll share a few more. I mean, from history, Beethoven was a famous coffee drinker. And he was just as much of a pain in the neck about drinking coffee as he was about everything else. He insisted that 60 beans be used to make every cup of coffee that he had. And the story is that he could tell if it was 61 or 59 beans, and he would give the maker of the coffee a hard time. Balzac, the famous French novelist, I don't know how many, are folks familiar with Balzac? He created thousands of characters. He was very prolific, and he drank 50 cups of coffee per day. And what he would do is go to sleep in the early evening and sleep for 4 or 5 hours, get up at midnight, and write for 15, 16 hours, fueled primarily by coffee. Another figure, and forgive me, these are heavily weighted towards the male gender, because so much of history is unfortunately, we've got these stories are more common than the ones about women. But Bach was really nervous that his daughter was, as they said, a coffee addict, that she drank too much coffee, and it was thought that he was worried that she wouldn't be marriable because she drank too much coffee. So he actually wrote an opera about that quandary. It's an opera about a father who's worried that his daughter drinks too much coffee and is wondering what to do with that. Teddy Roosevelt was said to drink a gallon of coffee a day, not quite 50 cups, but obviously a lot of coffee. And he drank it in cups that they say were the size of bowls. And he had 5 lumps of sugar in every cup of coffee that he drank. So there are a lot of folks in history who've drunk a lot of coffee. Let's see here. That's your 5th cup so far today? How many more will you have?
One maybe.
Maybe one more.
Maybe.
Okay. I'm good for 1, max 2, and if I have more than that, I'm up all night.
Anyway.
So warming up, Brazil is the largest coffee producer, and I'm saying the only American state that grows coffee is Hawaii. I'm going to contradict that in a minute. It's possible that Americans love coffee as a remnant from the Boston Tea Party, when colonists were encouraged to drink coffee instead. I was just reading recently a story about John Adams, who was a tea lover, and was wrestling with giving it up for political reasons after the Boston Tea Party. It was interesting. And coffee is the world's 2nd largest trading commodity after oil. So, what's the future of coffee? We throw this in here. That is an Arabica coffee plant representing a collaboration between the University of Florida and the USDA. The tube you see here has AI-equipped cameras that monitor the plant's roots. So coffee grows well in shaded areas, and typically at elevation in equatorial regions, and it likes humidity. So there's sort of a perfect confluence of those conditions in Florida already with citrus groves. And the citrus groves already have irrigation set up, and the plants themselves can provide shade for the coffee plant. So that's what we're seeing here is an experiment to see whether or not coffee can be grown like this in Florida. What country drinks the most coffee? And I'm not asking about volume. If you're talking about sheer volume, it's the United States. We drink a lot of coffee. But I'm talking about per capita, where arguably is coffee the most popular among the people of that particular country? Not Italy. What's that? Finlandia. Oh, let's see. There we go. Finland. So the places where for a large part of the year it's dark and very cold, no surprise, those are the places where coffee is most popular. Here are some fast facts. Coffee beans come from the bush-like coffee plant. The beans are the pits inside the coffee cherry. Technically, they're berries, so this is really a fruit in the pit of a fruit that we're talking about. It can take 5 years for a coffee plant to bear fruit or 10 years for commercial production, and then the coffee plant is good for about 30 to 40 years. And where coffee is grown can affect the taste. I was talking earlier with Yaya, who has a somewhat of an appreciation for different coffees around the world and different tastes. And the folks that have those palates where they appreciate those distinctions really say they can taste where it's from.
Ethiopia.
There you go. You love the Ethiopian.
Yeah, beautiful.
So varieties. There are actually over 120 varieties of coffee plants, but the world really focuses on just two, and the two that we focus on are Arabica and Robusta. And the Arabica is ubiquitous, and it is that probably because most of us have palates that don't, we're not interested in being that adventurous as far as moving into the Robusta, which is a little bit more bitter and a little bit more challenging for the palate. The Arabica is more expensive, it's sweeter and more robust, and the Robusta, lower acidity, less sweet, popular for espressos. And lastly, decaffeinated coffee is a process, not a variety. So you could theoretically decaffeinate any kind of coffee. And I was talking earlier with some folks who drink decaffeinated coffee, and someone else who had suggested, who was talking about what that process might entail and what it might do that's not great for your health in the long run. And it's true. What I've read anyway is that there are two distinct methods for decaffeinating coffee. One involves using chemicals and leaves some residue that you probably don't want. And the other is called the Swiss method, which uses osmosis and which is a lot more innocuous, if you drink decaffeinated coffee, I would suggest looking for the Swiss method as defined for the way the coffee was made. That's the best idea. So looking back, a little history of coffee. Historically, coffee's been cultivated in equatorial regions. It started in the Middle East in the 1400s and expanded to Northern Africa, India, South Asia, and the Americas. And climate change is a cause for concern. So the beginning. This is a mythical figure that we're looking at. This is Kalfi. This is an Ethiopian goat herder. And the story goes that his goats were nibbling on red berries, and then the goats, after they nibbled on the berries, were very energetic. So he decided to check out the berries too. He had a similar response. He was very energetic. And it was before it was made into a beverage, after this mythical discovery, they would eat it as a food. They would mix the coffee with animal fat and eat it. They weren't yet introducing it to hot water and using it as a beverage. But then it hopped from Ethiopia. It hopped over the Red Sea, and what we're looking at is a Sufi monk. And the Sufi monks were the first ones to make the coffee as we know it now. And this is around the middle of the 15th century, around 1450, they say. And they used it to fire them up for walks to Mecca and for religious rituals that went well into the night. So before we get into this, so from 1450 to 1600, for about 150 years, coffee moved throughout the Ottoman Empire. And as it did that, that Ottoman Empire made all sorts of, it fired them up. They made all sorts of discoveries. The numerals that we use today and the basis for a lot of our technology was arguably, the catalyst for it was this coffee. It was the convergence of ideas and the socialization. You could argue it had a big influence on that. This is a quote from Michael Pollan, who's written some very good books on all sorts of drugs. And lest we forget, there's a powerful drug inside of coffee, the caffeine. It's hardly an exaggeration to say that the arrival of caffeine in Europe changed everything. Coffee and tea ushered in a shift in the mental weather, sharpening minds that had been fogged by alcohol, freeing people from the natural rhythms of the body and the sun, thus making possible new kinds of work and arguably new kinds of thought too. So the answer is in this quote, but what were people drinking in the Western world for breakfast in that time, 1450 to 1600? I heard the answer. Stout, beer, a fermented beverage, which was typically alcohol. The water was a little too dicey to drink. It would probably make you sick. So alcohol was really a popular drink. So in 1600, it was trying to nudge its way into Italy. And there was Pope Clement VII, who was trying to push it back because it was foreign. It was something that was confined to the Muslim world, and they were pretty insular there at the time. And he was calling it Satan's beverage. It's Satan's brew. We don't want that here. It's bad for everybody. And the folks in Italy put pressure on the Pope. They said, we really like this. Are you sure? Can you think about it again? So the Pope thought about it again, and he said, you know what? It's not Satan's beverage. It's really good stuff. And so it started to move from Italy throughout the Western world. So in just 50 years, from 1600 to 1650, it moved to what's now the United Kingdom, and it moved as far west as New Amsterdam. So what was New Amsterdam in 1650? New York, right. It moved to New York. Now, here we've got Thomas Jefferson. Coffee, the favorite drink of the civilized world, and tea is for traders. And as we talked about earlier, the Boston Tea Party did a lot for coffee. And when I see Jefferson, this is a little off topic, but I'd like to mention it again. I'm thinking, because of recently looking at pizza and tomatoes, there was a great story about Jefferson. So for a tomato, what famous person in Massachusetts, one of the more famous individuals in Massachusetts, doesn't eat tomatoes? Tom Brady. Tom Brady. It's a root vegetable, and he thinks that it's bad for you. So what is that based on? Is it legitimate? As far as we can tell, it's not legitimate at all. But the concern developed because the roots of the plant can be poisonous. So if you go back, 250 years to Thomas Jefferson, that superstition was around at that time too. So to make his point at a dinner party once, Jefferson pulled out a big tomato and slowly brought it to his mouth to eat it like an apple. And the story is that some other people at the dinner party lunged to try and save his life, and he had to convince them that No, it's just a tomato. So negatives. Elephants in the room where coffee's concerned, including child labor, destruction of rainforests. The good news is that there is a movement towards responsibly sourced coffee. I looked at this question for both coffee and chocolate, and the popularity of both of those crops makes these concerns all the more challenging. So for instance, if you have, let's say you have a family in Honduras or in some country in Africa that has a small plot of land and they're really struggling to get by, and they decide to plant coffee plants, and the kids pitch in, working to cultivate the coffee, and they do that to survive. To highlight how difficult this issue is, do you want to tell those people, I'm not going to buy your coffee? So the best attempt, though, if this is a concern of yours, is the idea of fair trade. I think a lot of you have heard the fair trade designation. It's a term of art, so there is an organization that's trying to recognize and weed out the bad players. So if you are concerned about that, look for a fair trade designation on the coffee that you buy. Any questions about this? Health benefits and effects. Does anybody know what this is? Do we have any physicians or scientists in the room? This is adenosine. Adenosine is a natural chemical that we produce, and what it does is it makes us tired. From the time that we wake up, there are receptors in our brain that start to accumulate adenosine, and that's what makes us tired over time. What caffeine does is it jumps in between that process. It interrupts it, and it attaches to those same receptors to suspend that getting tired for a period of time. And it's interesting. I was talking to, I guess in talking to Yaya, she was mentioning a tea that's native to Central America, I think, and talking about the natural stimulant that's in that tea. And the cool thing about that natural stimulant is it doesn't have the same profile as coffee as far as how we respond to it. Coffee it's almost like cocaine in some ways. It's like it just shoots up and we get a lot of energy, and then there's a sort of a crash. But there are other chemicals, such as the one in this tea in Central America that's made from a different plant, that also stimulate but don't have as much of a sharp curve in terms of our responses to it. And that's similar to chocolate. So people talk about caffeine in chocolate, but most of what's in chocolate is called theobromine, which is another chemical that also gives you a flatter experience. It stimulates you, but it doesn't push you around as much as caffeine does. So how much caffeine are we getting? This is important to know, and we sometimes, especially those of us who buy cups of coffee out, are sometimes in the dark about how strong the coffee is that we're drinking. And let me ask, how many folks make at home? How many people just make coffee at home? Okay. And how many folks buy occasionally at least a cup of coffee out? Okay. So the majority, I was surprised to learn that we still, in the United States, have most people making it at home. It's hard to believe that as you drive down the street past Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks, but apparently it's true. So here are some caffeine figures that we have. And if we look at the top of the list, there's a Starbucks drip coffee. And this is a blonde roast, which, as we'll see in a moment, has more caffeine than a dark roast, which is counterintuitive, but it's true. So the blonde roast cup of coffee has 260 milligrams of caffeine in it. So you could see, like, if you're thinking, a Coca-Cola, that has so much caffeine, you would need to have, what is that? That's around 8 Coca-Colas you would get that much caffeine in a single Starbucks drip coffee. Dunkin' Donuts has a little bit less. Then there are these 5-hour energy things, which is, this one has 215 milligrams. But Red Bull, my partner, she likes the occasional Red Bull, and I've never gotten near a Red Bull, but I always assumed it had more caffeine than it actually does. It doesn't compare, as we see, to a cup of Starbucks coffee. I like, once in a while, getting the McDonald's coffee. I liked it more when it was Newman's, but but it's the app that they have now makes it so simple for me to go through the drive-through. I just push a button or say something into my phone, and I get a coffee for, at most, 99 cents. And it's not bad coffee. And for me, that it has, where do we have it? It has about 100 milligrams of caffeine, 109 milligrams. So it's also something, if you're caffeine sensitive and you're debating whether to have a cup after lunch, obviously you'd be a lot better off with a McDonald's cup than a Starbucks. Starbucks is also the biggest coffee company that we've got in this country. And we were talking about fair trade recently. Just about all of these companies, including Dunkin' Donuts, say they're going to be fair trade exclusively by the end of next year. Yeah.
Could I just add, now each of these individual coffee types, what kind of coffee is it? Where does that coffee come from?
I mean, it's famously difficult to tell exactly where it comes from, but more and more you're seeing companies are revealing that. But we do know, I can answer that question generally, that Arabica coffee, in terms of those two types, it's almost all Arabica, uniformly across the board.
The other question I have, when did Starbucks beat Dunkin' Donuts?
For sales?
Yeah, for notoriety and all that other stuff.
Oh. When did Starbucks beat Dunkin' Donuts? I don't know. Does anybody know the answer to that?
I didn't know that they did.
Yeah, I mean, the story I'll tell for that is last summer. Last summer, my mother, who's 88 years old, was all excited because her little brother, who's 85, said he was going to come up and visit her. And he hadn't seen her in a few years because of COVID. So she was excited, said, Ben is coming up. We made dinner arrangements, and the somewhat extended, 10 of us went out to dinner. And as we sat down, and again, my mother was very excited, my uncle launched into his story of the real reason why he came, which was to see the original Dunkin' Donuts. He is apparently a huge fan of Dunkin' Donuts, and the original store is still in Wollaston, and he was excited about seeing it. So we could see tea has a lot less of the caffeine as well. That gives you a sense.
It's interesting though, because I drink lattes from Starbucks. If I'm gonna get coffee, like 99.9% of the time I get that. But I feel it to be more potent than that. But this talks about, a 12-ounce cup. But a 12-ounce, the 12-ounce drink has milk in it and other things.
Well, if you're drinking a latte, then you're talking, obviously, the only coffee part is the espresso.
Yeah.
And the espresso, a lot of people think, and we were talking, Yaya and I were talking about this earlier, people think that it's got a lot more caffeine than regular coffee. It doesn't. So for instance, a single espresso will typically have less than 100 milligrams of coffee. And if you get a double espresso, you're talking about 150 milligrams. So a double espresso is going to be right around here in terms of caffeine content.
I was just thinking about like, if it's condensed, like if we're doing like ounce for ounce, the density of the caffeine within them. I just wasn't sure. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, if you take it by weight or by the size of the coffee, yeah, then it's going to be more caffeine dense. Yes. What about decaf? Caffeine, that's an interesting question. How much caffeine is in decaf? And it is an interesting question because the truth is there is caffeine in decaf. There's almost no decaffeinated coffee that has zero caffeine in it. And a lot of decaffeinated coffee, I read, can have as much as, can have 15, 20 grams in a cup, possibly. So I think it's worth investigating if you're caffeine sensitive. Try and find out if somebody's done a study on your particular coffee and how successful they are at extracting the caffeine. Does that answer? Okay. "10 healthy reasons to drink coffee." And you can see the asterisk here. Mr. Wheeler, the former principal who started the company, is a big fan of figuring out practical ways to use AI. And AI, he just asked it to create this list, and here it is. Number 1, boosts energy levels and productivity. Number 2, antioxidants that protect your cells from damage. Number 3, may lower the risk of several diseases: Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and liver disease. Number 4, reduce the risk of depression and improve your mood. Number 5, may help burn fat and increase metabolism. Number 6, contains essential nutrients like magnesium and potassium. Number 7, may lower the risk of type 2 diabetes. Number 8, can improve physical performance during exercise. I like to exercise. I don't have as much energy as I did when I was younger. And I didn't start drinking coffee till I was in my 30s and met a woman who drank coffee. But now for exercise, if I don't have that cup in the morning and I want to go hike, I don't have as much energy. It helps. Let's see, contains caffeine, which can help improve mental clarity and focus, can be a social and enjoyable part of a daily routine. Any questions or comments about that? No? Okay. So here's a little, and forgive me, this chart is going to be probably virtually impossible for a lot of you to see. But it's showing the different characteristics of Arabica coffee beans versus Robusta coffee beans. And we see here, we'll see the altitude at which it's grown. The Arabica beans are typically grown at a higher altitude, and the temperature at which it's grown. Arabica is grown and thrives at lower temperatures. So people say the common sense with a warming planet suggests that we're going to see the introduction of more Robusta coffee and beans, and probably different entrepreneurs or companies will probably try and develop people's taste for those beans more, because the Arabica beans are so much more vulnerable to climate change. The caffeine content, the Robusta coffee beans have a considerably higher caffeine content than the Robusta beans. And we also see the different regions of the world. Primarily, the Robusta beans are really popular in the Eastern Hemisphere and in parts of Africa as well. But in Southeast Asia, I went to Southeast Asia once and I got a coffee, and it's almost all Robusta beans. And I don't know if you guys have been there, but you're automatically served a coffee that's got a lot of dairy and sugar in it. Probably because if you just had it black, it would be a little too bitter for most of us. Pausing for a breath from a tree. Here's a picture of a coffee tree. It's really beautiful. Yeah. It does look like holly berries. So we talked a little bit, before we get into these beans, I should mention, you make me think, when it did come to the United States, and we talked a little bit about, we showed Jefferson for revolutionary times, But subsequent to that, during the Civil War, for example, each Union soldier got 35 pounds of coffee. And it was supposedly one of the biggest parts of their morale and one of the things they loved the most. There were a lot of stories about them using puddle water to make their coffee. They would do anything to be able to make their coffee. The Confederate soldiers weren't as lucky, and they had to drink a chicory root-based coffee, which might sound unappealing to you, but one of the great qualities of the chicory beverage is it's supposed to be really good at regulating blood sugar. And the other thing I wanted to mention, in pre-Columbian America, the Native Americans had something called black drink, cassava or black drink. What is it called? Cassava. They also had their own stimulating beverage. It was made from a species of holly that grows, it's a coastal species from Virginia down to Texas. And the cultural anthropologists tell us that they also used it as a commodity. They traded it on a large scale. So they really valued this drink. It was a part of their culture too. This is a picture of coffee beans, and the coffee beans pre-roast are here. The pre-roasted coffee bean is green and spongy. And then you can see as it gets roasted, it's getting darker as we go to the right there. So it depends on the roast. It's all about the roast. And now we're going to see the name of a roaster soon, but we've got enterprising individuals who are now creating their own companies, and they're all around Massachusetts. They're roasters that are tucked into different places, and I'll mention one that's local, fairly local in a moment. But if you go to one of these folks, the blessing is that you'll be able to tell exactly where your coffee came from. They'll typically be able to tell you exactly where they got it. And their art is the roasting art. They'll roast it in all sorts of different ways. Some of these people have places where you can drink the coffee there, but the main thing to do is to go there to buy the coffee and make it at home. So depending on the roast, a lot of this is counterintuitive to me. I always thought, for example, that dark coffee would have more caffeine, and it's the opposite of that. So a light roast has a lower temperature and a much higher caffeine content and much less oil in it. A medium roast is a little hotter, 420 degrees, with a medium amount of caffeine and still not really much oil. And a darker roast, the caffeine starts to go down and it starts to get a little smokier and oilier. Does anybody have questions? Yeah.
Yes, just about the, if I'm correct in assuming, well, maybe you can correct me, that the dark and extra dark is more bitter tasting?
The dark coffee, generally speaking, yes, is more bitter tasting.
And is this what we call the baristas, the coffee makers that, they have these little coffee shops, and they have baristas. I have a granddaughter that works on the Cape, and the place where she works, they make it with the most extraordinary kinds of coffee you never heard of.
Sure. I mean, I think that the barista is the person who actually makes your cup of coffee. They take the product of the roaster and then they develop it into the final product.
And they're like breweries now.
Right.
They really are.
Yeah.
So you have more choices, which is good, but,
Yeah.
There's some good coffee places in the Cape.
oh, yeah.
We grew our own beans. The smell is beautiful.
Oh, I know.
You-
It's a long time.
Where did you grow your own beans?
Roast our own beans.
Oh, roast your own beans.
Smells beautiful.
Very nice.
Grind them
Where did you roasted your own
and
beans?
my grandson does upstairs. I get down.
Oh, wow.
It's wonderful.
That's fantastic.
Long time.
I mean, like with so many other things, freshness plays such a huge role. And I've talked to different people who talk about a short period of time between roasting and brewing and saying it's just fantastic. Yeah.
The other thing I want to comment is the aroma. It's just so part of our culture. When we get up in the morning, we can almost smell
Smell
the coffee.
coffee.
Yeah.
And it triggers, it almost triggers that area to brain, okay, now I can wake up, sit
I
up.
haven't even had a sip of this yet, and I already feel more
Yeah,
energetic.
exactly.
I mean, that's what they say. They say its popularity is due in large part to the fact that it plays to all of our reward centers in the brain. It really touches all the bases for feeling good.
The Keurigs are not, that's not really coffee to me, but we have one because my daughter wants one.
Right.
I like the fresh,
The Keurig, yeah.
the fresh, what do you call it? Brewed,
French press?
ground.
Okay.
Ground coffee in a pot.
Huh.
That's the
Oh,
best.
there's nothing like a drip.
Freshly ground's better too. There's
Yeah,
a difference
a
in the
drip.
taste between freshly ground
Hmm.
and already ground too.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up in Europe,
Yeah.
and I used to have bottles
No,
of
I
chicory.
had one once I threw it away.
Oh, well.
And
I
they
had a
put it in
really
the coffee
fancy
pot, and that was their coffee.
Interesting.
My grandmother used to, during the war, Second World War.
Does anybody know what the official beverage of Rhode Island is?
Coffee milk.
There we go. There's the coffee milk. I think that was for my last person. Coffee milk. So it's a concentrated coffee liquid mixed with milk. Oh, do we have coffee milk drinkers?
Yes, we used to have it.
Oh, nice. Oh, nice.
Coffee ice cream, coffee anything.
Right. So here are different ways to make it.
We used to make coffee milk too as a kid. They had some kind of a syrup.
Yeah. A syrup as a kid as well. I think it's been around for a long time. Yeah.
I have been too.
So here's the low tech approach. I like this for pour overs. All you need is if I have this and I buy ground coffee or I grind my beans. All I have to do is put in a paper filter on the top, add the coffee, and pour the hot water over it. I love to do it. I don't have to plug in the carafe, needless to say. So I really like that approach. They actually have smaller ones. They have smaller ones if you're making it only for yourself, where you can make a single cup, and you can even do a modified version of the pour over by they have a version of this. It's arguably the same thing, but made out of plastic that you just put on top of a coffee cup, and then you just pour the water over that into the cup, directly into the cup. How do you guys make your coffee?
I know, I have.
Do the Perkin coffee maker? I mean, that seems to be the most popular still. Do we have French pressers? Anybody?
I've done it all. My dad
couple.
does it the original way on the last screen, and he actually gave me this little cup that can go on top of the cup. It's ceramic, and you can put your ground coffee and just
Yeah,
pour over
I've done it.
just for one cup.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I made the mistake of plunging it.
Whoops. So this is showing you how different grinds match the device that you're using. So for a French press, and now they have something called cold brew that you make and you leave it in your refrigerator overnight. I'm not really a cold brew guy, but that's looking for coarse beans if you're using a French press or doing the cold brew. If you have the pour over that I just mentioned, it's a medium grind. And then the drip coffee machine that we just mentioned, that's really popular, also a siphon machine, it's a medium grind. And then we get to a mocha pot and a Turkish coffee pot. And those are fine and extra fine grinds. I forget where I was, earlier this week, making this presentation, and a gentleman came up to me afterwards. He had grown up spending a lot of time in Iraq. And at one point, I had said during the presentation that the recommendation is that you don't take the boiling water and pour it directly on the coffee, because that you're kind of, you're insulting the beans a little bit. You want to wait maybe just 20 seconds. And during that time, it apparently cools down to around 195, 200. That's ideal. So he came up to me afterwards and said, you know what? That boiling thing, I kind of wonder about that, because he said the way that they would make coffee was in a giant pot, and they would boil the coffee and everything together, and then they would drain it with cheesecloth. Cuban coffee, yeah, I've heard a lot of folks love Cuban coffee.
It's a process to make, at least by hand, but it is so good. Very potent.
This is the beloved espresso. I had a couple of people coming up to me talking about how much they love espresso. I love it too, but it's more expensive. You know, it's more expensive to get it out, and I don't have the espresso machine. Who has an espresso machine? Nice. Yes, a press out, which is espresso translated. Folks mentioned drinking coffee in Italy. I'm curious, how was coffee served to you in Italy? I've heard. And was it served with like a wedge of lemon, or was it? No. Interesting.
Everybody goes into a little shop in the morning and they take a shot of it.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
Every morning and have a shot. Always wonderful.
So I had mentioned different roasters, and getting near the end here, but I wanted to mention one roaster. This is Mike Shea, is down in Bridgewater. He gives special discounts to first responders, and he makes some really good roasts, some very good coffee. And it's nothing fancy at all, but he's got a little place where you can actually drink a cup if you're down there getting it. And we always promote, since we're a small business, we promote small businesses. We like the idea of keeping the money in the community. So if you can find a local roaster, please frequent them. And lastly here, I just wanted to show some coffee advertisements. These are a couple from fairly long ago. It had to be a while ago if the coffee was 25 cents a cup. A couple of vintage coffee advertisements. And here are some more modern, a couple of more modern. Yeah, the price is also, that's why I've cultivated a taste just for simple coffee, because I like the lattes, but if you're going out and getting a latte, you can spend $8 for a cup of coffee, which is not in my price range. So, and this is it. So, any other? Does anybody else? Yes. Right. Yes. I still run into people who are, the food is fuel people, who are instant coffee is fine and dandy with them, and they love it and they love the convenience of it. So.
And hoping for the best, and it's very, and I have a button where I could slow drip.
It's an aesthetic insult, I guess you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, everybody's a little bit protective of, it's a simple pleasure, but, we love people to reflect the joy that we get from our simple pleasure. And if people are doing it wrong, it can be agitating, I guess. Yes.
I was just talking to this young lady about the dilution of water to coffee. And some of the coffee makers, they tell you, that to make a cup, a 6-ounce cup, at least the coffee maker I use, it's a small, Mr. Coffee. And when I brew my coffee, that's what I use. And I actually like that best. And I like medium roast. And decaf, I can drink maybe 1 cup of caffeinated. I just think that it does cause me to have some, palpitations.
Oh.
It's not good.
Wow.
But I'm all set now.
Is it energy or is it
My
anxiety?
point is that it says to use 6 ounces of water to 1 scoop
Uh-huh.
And if I do it that way, it usually comes out right. You know, I don't want to make it too bitter, because I don't like bitter coffee.
I love strong coffee.
So I was wondering if you have any experience with the dilution as opposed to the,
I think it's like so much of this, it's a matter of personal taste and to go with the manufacturer's suggestion until you find your ideal spot. I mean, some people, want to save money and they don't mind weaker coffee, so their bag will last a lot longer. Other people
and does
want
it
more.
know if refrigerating it or freezing it affects the flavor?
What do people think about that? How?
It makes it stronger.
Yeah. Making it feels like it makes it stronger to you?
No, I'm asking.
Oh. I'm not aware that it makes it stronger. I'm not.
Stronger. Like even if I cook it, or if I make a pot, and I make a pot of espresso actually, something like that, and I put it in my fridge, and I just add like an amount to my cup every morning, and then just like make a nice coffee. Before I put it in the fridge, and you would think something more, you can taste more. It's like more receptors. When it's cold, like it definitely tastes stronger. It wouldn't be as strong as it's the same substance, the same amount, but it definitely tastes stronger.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I do not know the answer to that. I'm thinking of ice. We didn't talk about iced coffee, but I'm never really been an iced coffee person. So if it's 100 degrees out, I'm drinking a hot cup of coffee. And my partner, she likes iced coffee on occasion, and I don't know if it was to convince me to try it or not, but she does take coffee that hasn't been finished, that she still has, and puts it in the old-fashioned ice trays and freezes it. So that's the way that she makes iced coffee, with coffee ice cubes, and she'll add cream to it. It's really good.
And it doesn't weaken,
Great idea.
Yeah.
doesn't weaken.
What's that?
It does not weaken.
Right, exactly. It doesn't. That was always my beef with the iced coffee. It would dilute itself as the cubes melted.
I order like less, I say half ice in the winter.
Yeah,
Half
I've
ice.
seen that.
Right. If the iced coffee lovers,
I love all winter.
you have to ask to restrict the ice. Otherwise, they'll just put a ton of ice in there.
I also read that the most coffee that is
It's really good. That's a really good.
ice
She must do
all year round.
Really? I was not aware of that. She was saying that she read somewhere that most coffee drunk in the Northeast is iced coffee.
During the winter.
Oh, during the winter. Huh. Interesting. I would think it would be more popular in the summer. Yes.
Go to Dunkin' Donuts. You always have to have one hot coffee or iced coffee, because they give you iced coffee. In the wintertime, there's more iced coffee than the hot coffee.
Oh, well.
In Boston, they, you gotta say you want a hot coffee, because more people drink iced coffee.
Wow. And I'm sure the businesses love that because they can, sell you water. It's wonderful.
I think years ago in the hospitals when we worked, they had the steam heat and it was so hot that we would start drinking iced coffee all year round because you were dry.
Makes sense.
That's when I started.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. Good to see everybody. Thank you.